My name is Karen Pratt. I'm a bookseller here. I know many of you. And I am very happy to introduce two of our favorite writers. Sarah Sue Taylor is going to be interviewing our guest of honor, Flynn Berry, whose new book came out a couple weeks ago. And Trust Her, which is selling like hotcakes. Copies here, and we as well have copies of, no, I'm not being a stupid bookstore, we have copies of her earlier books. And we have copies of Sarah's books and also her new one, which comes, we don't have copies of her new one because it's not out yet, but that comes out August 6th. Cool. So everybody turn off your phones if you would and listen to these two wonderful people who I've come to know and really enjoy their book talk. Thank you, Karen. You're welcome.
Karen also helped me title my book. I ran some possible titles by her. One was Castro in a miniskirt, which is the thing of an Irish politician. And Karen looked at me and said, no.
No, I'm not shy.
That's that. Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
You're welcome.
Well, I'm so happy to be here to help Flynn launch her wonderful new book. If you haven't read it yet, you're in for a treat. It's just fabulous. And Flynn is one of my favorite writers, writing in this space of thrillery, mystery, literary thrillery kind of books. And we can, I think you sort of occupy a wide Venn diagram of wonderful sort of, literary fiction and thrillers and mystery and espionage, of course, in these books. So I'm just so happy to be here with you. I, like many people, I was introduced to your work through Under the Harrow, which is just a fantastic novel. If you haven't read it, please do. And as I've gotten to know Tessa and Marion in these two books, one of the things that I've wondered a bit about is where your fascination with the UK and Ireland comes from. Why have you chosen to set so many of your wonderful stories in the British Isles?
This is also funny because Sarah is also an American who writes mystery sets in Ireland. And it feels a little bit like it's surreal to be here with you because we met at Putnam's about a year ago and you had read my manuscript and we did a plot talk and I changed the whole structure. Sarah's a wonderful writer and also a very good editor. Lucky to have her. And so for the UK and Ireland, I think it started when I was living in Texas and I hated it with passion. I was living in Austin, which people love and shouldn't love. And I just really wanted it to be rainy. I wanted grass. I wanted ponds. I wanted lakes. And so this was kind of my escape to start writing about the UK and then eventually Ireland. And it felt also like somehow writing a crime novel set in the UK and Ireland makes more sense to me than doing one here because their police force is a lot less violent in a lot of ways. I don't know, it's a different kind of world to be writing mystery in than it is here. And I find detectives there to have a little bit more kind of room to play with in some ways. And then I think also just having read so many books set in the UK and Ireland, it felt like inhabiting this fictional world. I remember on one of my first research trips to Dublin, I was sitting on the train and the man behind me was just describing what he had bought at a market, just a list of ingredients to someone on the phone. And it was beautiful. And I was like secretly taking notes because there's just this really lovely cadence. And I wanted to try to get that in writing.
You do. I mean, I think you capture, I remember reading Northern Spy and I was so blown away by how you captured not just the Irish, not just sort of Hiberno English, but specifically Northern Irish turns of phrase and colloquialisms. And so how did you do that? How did you, I really think you just capture the rhythm of Northern Irish speech.
Yeah, so I just listened to a lot of voices. So when I went over for research, I did a lot of eavesdropping. I was astonished how much they used the word "we" to mean little, even like every other word. And then it was just really fun to do that part of the research. Like one of my favorite research documents is a notes app that someone's teenage daughter sent me about all the slang her friends use. And it just felt like sort of opening up this other dictionary and this whole other lexicon that I could play with. And then, just listening to tons of comedy panel shows to see how people make fun of the news there, and reading lots of books and fiction out there.
Yeah. Cool. So Trust Her is a sequel to Northern Spy, and both of the books are set in what you describe in your author's note as I think you call it a near future alternate Ireland. And essentially, what you do, which is this really interesting thing, which is you say, how would Ireland look? How would the island look if the peace agreement had failed? If there had been a return to sectarian violence? I think it's 10 years after the Good Friday Agreement, and your stories sort of unspool from there. That these paramilitary groups that people thought were sort of sleeping, at least, if not gone, come roaring back to life in your story. Where did the idea to write a piece of speculative fiction, alternate history, where did you get that idea? I'm so curious about sort of where that got started.
Yeah, so I've been researching the Troubles, which in theory ended in 1998 with the Good Friday Agreement. And it just felt like a tinderbox, or it does still feel to me like a tinderbox. And it also felt like all of the kind of randomized violence and instability that we think of for the Troubles has kind of spread around the world in the decades since then. So people now experience the kind of just surprising acts or events on a much more regular basis. So it feels very contemporary, and it feels like something we're all living with. And then during Brexit, the IRA said that any target on the island of any border on the island of Ireland could be a target. So you have this group that in theory has gone, saying that they will run an armed campaign again if provoked. And there are currently more peace walls in Belfast than there were during the Troubles, which are these huge corrugated iron walls separating Protestant and Catholic neighborhoods that get closed at night, so you can't walk across them. There are, I think, something like 10,000 loyalist paramilitary members right now. And there's also a generation of young men who are growing up being told that the Troubles were the glory days, and that was when you had this glamour and you had significance in your community and you had meaning and you had camaraderie, and no one else is sort of offering those kids a whole lot of respect in other ways. So you have boys now being groomed by being taken to like McDonald's or being coached on soccer teams and bought new shoes, and that's happening right now. So it felt like hopefully politically Ireland moves to becoming unified, and that's how the solution occurs, but that there's still this kind of big capacity for violent unrest to occur again. And the last thing is I was really kind of shocked and moved by the case of Lyra McKee, who's a journalist who was killed in Derry in 2019 by the new IRA. She was a writer working on a book. She was a queer activist. She was this kind of rising star in Belfast, and she was shot and killed at a riot in Derry. And then after that, because it was such a small community, a lot of people knew the identity of the person who had killed her. And so graffiti appeared around the neighborhood saying, they will forget about you, we won't, which was a warning from the IRA to potential informers that if they went to the police, they would be found and punished, probably killed. and that was in 2019. So it's sort of like, it felt like this just kind of really unsteady piece that I wanted to explore.
Interesting. So the sort of vehicles that you came up with to explore these ideas are sisters, Mary and then Tessa. And Tessa's sort of our main character, our first person point of view character. And so we spend a lot of time with her, and she's, you draw her so beautifully. She's a mother, she has a very young son, and in many ways that's kind of her, I see that as kind of her defining characteristic. Is that fair to say? Is that how you conceived of her and that relationship with her son Finn? To me, it felt like in both books, that sort of drives everything she does. It's to make safety and peace for Finn. How far along in the writing process did that kind of become her defining characteristic for you? Did you know from the beginning?
Yeah, so I started researching Northern Spy when I was pregnant with Ronan, who a lot of people here know very well. And it was not intentional, but I was going to these prenatal appointments with research books about the Troubles, and then hoping, my baby would be okay. And those two things just kind of like fused and became irrevocably linked. And so I was writing Northern Spy as he kind of grew. So the baby in that is 6 months old, and I was writing it mostly when he was about 6 months to a year. And then the child in Trester is 4, and I was writing it when he was 4. And it felt sort of like, I don't take a lot of photographs, and I never kept a baby journal, but this was kind of where all of that like urge to capture those moments went. So, the sort of really tiny, ordinary, anonymous moments that happen when you're alone with a small child on like a Tuesday night that you forget otherwise, it felt like I had a sort of place to put all of those. And I wanted to kind of respect them in a way, because it feels like a lot of drudgery often when you're just kind of, like sterilizing bottles or picking up Legos. But I really like books that show that caregiving work as this kind of noble thing, and that it's meaningful and sort of heroic to do that kind of caretaking for anyone, younger or older. And then I also just really love the stories I heard from mothers in Northern Ireland when I was doing research. A lot of them were putting themselves in danger and exposing themselves to risks, and they had children, and I don't think they found those two things at all contradictory. I think they thought that, of course, they would do this, and having children was not a reason not to. My favorite was a security journalist named Alison Morris, who writes for the Belfast Telegraph, and she writes about terrorism and paramilitaries. And she received a death threat from a man whose nickname is the Weasel. And when she got home, her 12-year-old daughter had bought her a stuffed animal weasel and put it on her bed as a joke. And it was just this kind of like, they weren't going to be intimidated, and they were going to just keep doing their work and keep resisting in the ways that they wanted to. And I just kept hearing, like, that's one of hundreds of stories like that I heard that I just wanted to sort of pay honor to.
Yeah, I love what you say about the sort of heroic work of caregiving, because you juxtapose it with the men in this world who think of themselves as heroes, and in fact, many of them are actively, stopping peace and are keeping the sectarian violence going. And so there's an interesting thing there about sort of that it's a woman who is doing this heroic work, and then we have these men who are responsible for death and violence. So, I thought that was really interesting, and I know you've done a lot of research on women in the Troubles. Can you tell us about is there one woman in particular or one story in particular? I know I've seen some great photos that you've shown. Someone who's really interesting to you.
Yeah, there's so many. One is Rose Dugdale, who was an English debutante who came out to the Queen as part of a society ball and when she was young, and then she became a Marxist, and she joined the IRA and planned an art heist where she stole a Vermeer painting to ransom for the release of IRA prisoners. It was the biggest art heist that had ever been executed at the time. And it was just this kind of, her story is just so strange and peculiar, and she's not like a household name, which I find extraordinary.
Yeah.
And she's still, the last I heard, she was in her 80s, and she didn't do press or anything, but her Twitter icon was the Vermeer painting that she had stolen. Hilarious. Like, there's no remorse. So she's someone who, I think she was very much a believer in the ends will justify the means, and we're building a socialist republic, and it will be worth it if people get hurt. But then there are other people, like my friend Maria Cahill, who grew up in an IRA family. She was the first person to publicly accuse an IRA member of sexual assault, and was sort of subjected to this like kangaroo court and all kinds of horrors. And she is still an activist and a politician and a writer, and just hasn't given an inch over the decades since then. And I love her. She's very funny.
She published a book recently, right?
Yeah, it's called Rough Beast. It's wonderful. And then two women who were sort of an early inspiration were two sisters where they grew up in the same family, and one went away to university and one joined the IRA. And so I remember someone describing it to me as one of them was studying in a library while the other was lying in a ditch watching a police station to plan an attack. And there was an interview with the sister who went to college recently who was saying they don't speak. They still don't speak, that there was a rift and like never the two will meet. And she became a journalist who writes these like scathing criticisms of Sinn Féin and the IRA. And so that kind of way in which a family can kind of diverge, I found really interesting.
Yeah, and in a sense, you were doing something not exactly like that, but similar with Marion and Tessa, at least in Northern Spy. And I love how their relationship and their roles shift over the two books. Let's talk a little bit about writing process. Tell us about your writing process. Where do you start a book? Do you outline? Are you a plotter or a pantser? Does everybody know what that means? Plotter, pantser. Plotters outline. They know what's going to happen before they sit down to write. Pantsers write by the seat of their pants. And so you'll often hear writers ask each other, like, are you a plotter or a pantser? So I would love to know about that. And yeah, just tell us about your writing process.
So I don't outline, and I sort of try to start from scratch. I write longhand, and I try to see if the story will keep going or not. So I start with kind of a character or an idea for a scenario, and then like 9 times out of 10, that idea dies, and it's horrible. And I complain to Ashley, and then I see her at the playground, who's also a writer, or Jeff and I go for a walk, and I complain about it. Yeah. A lot of those walks. And sometimes that moment happens 50 pages in, or 3 months in, or a year in, which is very demoralizing. But I feel like there's no way of knowing if a novel will sustain you for 2 years until you're actually in the process. And then when it is working, it's the best feeling in the world, because it feels like I'm just sort of writing someone else's diary, and I'm sitting down with just a piece of paper and a pen, and I'm just telling her diary or confession and figuring out what will happen next alongside her. So it's really inefficient also. I don't recommend it.
It's like writing, it's just hard. It's hard to write about. It's hard to write about.
My whole writing group's here, and I feel like Dresser brought in, I think, like 7 first chapters of it, which is just trying to like figure out where it was starting. And then I tried to write something that was kind of like a romantic comedy recently, and I brought to them, and they're like, no, no, what is this? And they thought the like love interest was a villain and was like, so demoralizing.
Maybe you could title it, What Would Castro and a Mickey
Send it on its way.
and
Yeah.
put it out under a pseudonym or something.
Yeah. Really bad. Someday.
Are you one of these people who, once you've figured out what you're doing, you start writing and your copy's pretty clean and you can kind of just keep going and you don't have to go back, or are you like a real like, Annie Lamott shitty first drafts person? Where would you put yourself?
Yeah, I think it ends up being rewritten a lot.
Yeah.
But that part feels kind of fun because then you're just doing a lot of location research or rereading the same paragraph a bunch of times, and that feels kind of like you can get lost in that work for hours.
Yeah.
And it's satisfying.
It's fun. Once you've got the scaffolding,
Yeah.
it's fun to fill in. Well, I have a couple more questions I want to ask, but I'm wondering if this might be a good time to see if we have some questions in the audience for Flynn. Does anybody have anything they want to ask at this point? That we do. Yes, do that.
So this was a sequel. Do you think this will keep going? Is it a series? I mean, so I love it. No.
I think I have to stop. I'm being like dragged from my hands. The problem is that I keep thinking of other characters who could have their own book. Like there's one woman who I mentioned briefly who is a makeup artist at the BBC in Belfast. And I met her when I was researching the book, Northern Spy, and she said everyone tells her all their secrets while she's doing their makeup. So she does the politicians before they go on stage on like Newsnight for the BBC. And she says she's touching their faces and they just start talking. She calls it her wee confessional. And I think she could be a book. There's also, right now, the two most powerful politicians in Northern Ireland, the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister, are two women whose families, they grew up about 20 minutes from each other, and their families were both paramilitary on opposite sides.
Yeah.
And now they're working together.
And they're both fascinated.
And they're both fascinated.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they could be a book. But no, I think I have to look at America a bit. I do live here.
You've had a good run though. You stayed in that wet, misty, green place for quite a while, and now, just in time for climate change in America, maybe we'll have more rain here. Yeah.
So I saw in one of your posts that you go grocery shopping for your characters, and so I was wondering what that process is like and what you bought for Tessa.
So yeah, I really love figuring out what my characters eat. It feels very useful in kind of unlocking who they are and what they are like when they're alone, how they celebrate things with other people, if they kind of cook for convenience and they're very busy, or if they're comfort cooking. And so Tessa is a very aspirational cook. She wants to have a life that's much more kind of ordered and leisurely than she does, which I identify with for sure. I really identify with that. And so she'll kind of get these ambitious recipes and buy fresh herbs when she goes to the grocery store and buy unusual ingredients. And then her sister buys frozen food and thinks that cooking is like retrograde and a waste of time. And boring. And so, yeah, it feels very nice to see, like, does someone have a sweet tooth? Are they adventurous, or do they buy the same thing every week? What they will buy and then not cook, like what will just end up in the bottom of the fridge, because that happens to all of us. And I feel like people are very, very vulnerable when they're in a supermarket, because it's like you're tired often, you're hungry, and you're worried about how expensive it is. And you also don't really know what your week is going to look like.
Yeah.
So it's just, I'm always kind of like looking in other people's carts also. I mean, like, okay, they definitely have kids because they're buying like 1 million goldfish. And then you'll see like a grad student with this very elegant like basket with just a bottle of wine and like some olives.
Yeah. I love that so much. My new book is set in 1965 in Vermont, and one of the ways that I've sort of figured out who these people are and what their houses look like is by buying vintage cookbooks. And a lot of them are those community cookbooks, like the Burlington Trinity Church Women's Cookbook, and they are so revealing. I mean, food is so revealing, and I think it says a lot about social class. It says a lot about how you grew up. It says a lot about your emotional state, and I think shopping for your character. I think that's such a great idea. I love it.
Yeah, Katie was just she's studying a book in Charleston, and was also doing community cookbooks. That were like,
Yeah.
you get your help to do this.
Which was not the Vermont cookbook said. Yeah, and they're wonderful. Some of them have little illustrations, and each woman would do her own page. So they're like these very revealing things. I love them, which is great.
That's my mom.
Pronounce it. Which character from Northern Spy and Trust Her are you going to miss the most? And no fair of saying Finn.
Well, I still live with him, so. I think Tessa herself, it felt like she became this kind of companion for me. And I started working with her voice before I even had a child. I had a second child. We moved across the country. There was a pandemic, and she was this kind of co-wrote. And so I feel like she's very, very real to me, and I kind of can picture her kind of like at the playground and how she would look when she's pushing her kid on the swings, or how she looks when she's moving around the town. Where she lives, and no, she does not live here. So that feels like a bit of a loss. Like I've lost this kind of sister companion.
Oh, that's my follow-up question. Sorry. Why sisters?
Yeah,
Had sisters.
I wanted to ask that too, and I forgot to, so thank you.
3 out of your 4 books.
You're regret asking.
And you, you do not have sisters. I happen to know.
Okay. The reason you regret asking that question is my mom has 3 sisters, and I was with the 4 of them recently, and they are nuts. But yeah, like they are all very warm, stable, wonderful people. And then when they're in the same room, you're like, what? I have no idea what's going on. They're arguing, and then they're laughing and hugging and crying and like mentioning things that happened when they were 6, and then arguing over something tiny. And I just love that dynamic. I love how families can move so quickly from like an argument or blame or reproach, and then they come back to like fondness and common ground, and then they go back and they go back. And it's just this very kind of, I think, hopeful process, especially with writing about the Troubles, where the sort of goal is to watch a society that's falling apart mend itself and sort of step back from the brink of civil war. And it feels a lot like how families can pull back from things that are kind of irreparable and then make up or mend.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It also occurs to me that Tessa and Marion are sort of have complementary characteristics. It's almost like and I maybe under the Harrow too, that this idea of like one whole person comprised of 2 sisters, and so I think that's a really interesting thing. It just occurred to me. What other questions?
Hi, Flynn. As someone who writes kind of on the fine dividing line of like literary fiction and genre, do you have like a process while you're writing that helps you like both avoid the pitfalls of genre writing and like the tropes that everyone kind of expects and makes it kind of, again, sometimes redundant, and I say this as someone who loves genre fiction in general, while also though like paying respect to the tradition of mysteries and thrillers or whatever the genre tradition might be?
Yes, that's so interesting. I'm also curious what you feel about that. I think while I'm writing, I'm just trying to sort of figure out the story, and then when I get to the end of the draft, I can do the outline with the index cards and sort of move things around and think then about what a reader kind of expects, like when they expect a lift in tension, when they expect some kind of quiet time, and how to plot it out that way. And then it feels like the genre is really comforting because you have these kind of beats that you can work towards, and then while you're working towards those beats, you can do all the other stuff. You can write about food and sisters and motherhood, and know that then you're going to get to this big scene, which I really love. I think before I wrote my first book, I tried to write a book that had no genre elements, and it just was it kept kind of collapsing. And then having a genre feels very exciting to me because I want to find out what happens. I'm really curious how people write actual kind of murder mystery puzzles where you have like a locked room and 5 suspects. I don't know how you do that. Let's see.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I agree with you. I find the sort the scaffolding of a structure, of a formal structure, really, I almost feel like it allows you to do more with language, and it allows you to, to me the most interesting thing about human beings is what they do when they're under pressure. And there's no pressure like the pressure of a murder investigation or your life being in danger. And so I think there's something about just like that formal structure, and it allows you to explore a character kind of within these confines that can work really well, and can also, feel cliche and tired if not done well. And I think there's been a lot of interest lately in this sort of thriller form, and I think there are a lot of people who aren't genre writers who are attempting it, and it's been really interesting to me to watch that and to see how, some people I think it's absolutely successful, and for some people it's not. And I think the line is like, do you have a respect and an appreciation for the form, for the genre before you attempt it?
I do like it. I also feel like thriller writers are the nicest. It's like you meet someone who writes these books where horrible things happen, and it's so bloody and so gory, and they're so lovely.
They're like the most well-adjusted.
Yeah. You guys are not nervous,
I
but
go to
then
a lot
like
of these
self-help ones are.
conferences, and like you go to these conferences and it's just like the loveliest people, and then you walk into a panel on like how to poison someone, and everybody's just so nice and lovely.
It's like they've gone all that out on the page.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
When did you realize that Tessa's story had a part 2?
It was after we moved here, and I think I kept trying other novel ideas and then having them collapse. And I felt really homesick for her, and it felt like usually when you finish a book, you're relieved and you feel like you can have your life back. But in this case, it felt kind of like a breakup where I wasn't ready to end the relationship, and it felt like this yearning. And she kept kind of like appearing in other novels I was trying to write, like the character would suddenly morph into her. And so I wrote just the first scene, which became the first scene in the book, to try to get it out of my system, and then I just wanted to figure out what would happen next. And it felt like the research I had done was so interesting that there were all these threads that I hadn't used yet, and kind of it felt like I had gone easy on Tessa in the first book in some ways, and I wanted to push her a little harder, and sort of force her to face certain things. So yeah, it was a slow process.
In the back.
Was the book received differently in the United States versus in Ireland, or in Ireland versus Northern Ireland, or Ireland versus England? And was that expected or unexpected, and how did that play out?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think overall it went well. I was kind of terrified. I got readers, before it was published, I had readers from Belfast read it and say, like, we don't say, I think it was like pasture and field, or things like that. I don't know if I can say this because this was being recorded. I was sued for damages, which was unpleasant, because I had named an actual company in the book, which you can do here. So here you can say, like, there's someone who works at the Norwich bookstore who's a murderer. No problem. And you can write that, you can publish it, and we have freedom of expression laws that protect that kind of artistic license. And they don't there, which I didn't know. So that was alarming. But other than that, yeah, I don't know. That comes to mind more than anything else.
Karen.
I don't think that you're one of the kind of writer who doesn't read books while they're writing, because I've talked to you about reading books while you were writing. But I was wondering two things. One, if you avoid reading certain books while you were writing. And the second question is, who do you respect a lot these days in terms of writing?
Yeah, no, I always read. And I feel like the writing comes from the reading, and I write because I love reading, and it feels like continuing that conversation. And so when people say they don't read, I was bewildered. It's like if you were a musician and you just like blocked your ears anytime music was playing, like that wouldn't make any sense. So there's nothing I avoid while I'm writing. I think the writers who I love are the ones like Sarah who are doing thriller and psychological character studies in the same book. So Home Fire by Kamala Shamsi is probably my favorite book. When Will There Be Good News by Kate Atkinson, I love a lot. After You'd Gone by Maggie O'Farrell.
What was the third one?
After You'd Gone, Maggie O'Farrell's first book, which she wrote in 2000. And just books, usually I like books where there's some kind of psychological tension or suspense, but not necessarily that can be not like a physical threat. Also, it can be something like the fear of being discovered. I also really like Karen's book recommendations.
Yes.
It's a very nice Venn diagram.
Yeah, if you like mystery thrillers or mystery thriller adjacent, Karen's a great source of recommendations. As you were saying that, it just occurred to me, have you ever read Melanie Finn's The Hair? So she's a Vermont author. Have you, Karen?
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. It's like really just like tense and there's like a darkness to it that I think you might like. Just occurred to me. Anything else? I have like one or two more questions that I'll ask if there aren't any. But if you all have some, I'd rather go to you.
No, I know.
There is one. There's one right there. Yeah.
No, I just wondered if, piggybacking on the question about what you like to read, if you want to share the 10 best books you nominated for the New York Times. You won't? Oh.
We were talking before about how when you're a writer and people ask you what
impossible.
Your favorite books or like the last 5 great books you read. They can all be in your mind up until the moment that person asks you, and then you just go. This happens to me. I just go absolutely blank, and it's like I can't think of a single title or author. It's the weirdest thing.
That's why I suggested she already knows.
No.
I have a question for both of you. It's like a little bit of a general question, but when did you know you wanted to be a writer? Like, was there a moment? Was there a book? Was there a catalyst?
Do you want me to go first? I was a kid who loved to read. You know, I read all the time, and I remember really vividly reading the book, and actually I wasn't reading it, it was being read to me. E.L. Konigsberg's from the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil and Frank Wilder. And my 4th grade teacher read that book aloud to us. And it was like, I think she would save it for the end of the day. And for 20 minutes at the end of every school day, all the kids, she would turn off the lights and we would all kind of settle into our desks, and she read that book aloud to us, and then other books too, but I think that's the one that I really remember. And there was something about her voice and the way she read that just allowed me to really focus on the choice of words and the sentence construction and how she built character. And I remember listening to that book and thinking,
you know, just like it was a kind of magic. It was like she was just putting these words together, and somehow she created this thing that was real. And I remember, I mean, it sounds kind of cheesy, but like I remember really vividly thinking, like, I want to do that. I want to figure out how to do that. What about you?
Yeah, I think I've always just wanted that. Because I love reading. I was at Allie's house last week, and she had a book called The Face on the Milk Carton by Caroline B. Cooney.
Oh, Caroline B. Cooney, she had some good ones.
Yeah, it was like a thriller about abduction that I read at age 10, which we all read at age 10. And I realized seeing it on the shelves, I think that probably got me to maybe want to write something that was scary. I don't know. I just, when I saw that book, I was like, oh, that book. It's incredible.
Yeah, I have some ones like that too. I mean, you know, and those of us who grew up in the 80s, like there was some weird stuff. The V.C. Andrews, the whole V.C. Andrews thing, you know, like those are most disturbing, violent books, but we all read them when we were 10. You know?
We did.
I don't know. No, clearly, nobody was helicoptering in those days. Actually, this is a good place to ask. What's your advice to writers? To someone who's working on a book or maybe has a dream of it at some point in their life. What's sort of your best advice to aspirational writers?
I think the best advice is that you have to take it seriously when no one else does. So you have to call it work. Like, don't say you're writing, because then people will be like, well, you can do that on another day and it doesn't matter. But if you say I'm working for 3 hours, then people will actually usually leave you alone for that time. And then also just to remind yourself that most books are written without a contract.
Yes.
So the fact that no one has like paid you or asked for your book yet doesn't mean anything, and that it's how most books get written, and you have to just sit down and do it. So yeah, I think just taking it seriously and thinking that there are books and authors aren't somehow like anointed by someone, and that it's a process that is available to people.
I also think separating the writing from the business is really, really important. I'm sometimes grateful because I sold my first book was published in 2003. So I got an agent and sold my first book way back in the old days where, you know, there were no support groups online. There was no like Twitter hashtags where you could commiserate with other people querying. There was no, you know, it was a very, it was very lonely in many ways, but I think it was so much easier to separate, just like I'm writing this book and at some point I will have to enter this world of publishing. And I worry about people who are coming up now, I think, who like right from the beginning are part of all of these, you know, online query groups and are just really, really steeped in marketing and publicity. And I think I think you have to let the writing develop, and you have to become a writer sort of before you try to do all that other stuff. It's hard, but it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, it's also hard because it's not like the same skill set whatsoever.
Right, exactly.
Like being good on Instagram is not.
So right, it doesn't help.
Comes naturally.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, when you like write books.
Scrolling through Instagram doesn't write the book.
It doesn't.
Anything else that people are wondering about?
I don't like to read anymore. I like to listen. And so I don't know when everybody's reading these books because days are really busy, you know. So I always multitask and listen to books all day long with the kids. So when do you listen? Do you read or both?
Yeah, I think I just like don't clean my house. I like
But
very
you can clean and
rarely
listen.
exercise. It's different though. It'll be different. Yeah, don't really exercise often enough. There are a lot of friends in this room that I'd probably see 20,000 times more often than I do if I weren't working in the book. So yeah, I think it is just sacrificing certain things that you really love and care about, and kind of hoping that you'll get the balance right eventually.
But I'm also saying I love listening to books.
Yes.
Spoken word is so comforting and entertaining. So I look forward to the moment I can hear it telling the story is told to me.
Audiobooks are great. I think, some people are snobby about audiobooks and say, oh, it's not really reading, it's not, but hey, it is. You're you're taking in that narrative, you're experiencing it, and I love
I
it.
have to go back and listen quite often because I think about something else or getting out of the car. But I love it. But how did you feel about the audio version?
I haven't really listened to it because that feels strange. I mean, like listening to your own voice on a voicemail recording or something. But I love that it exists. And I think it was so nice that I have an actor who's from Ireland and really inhabited the role and felt similarities with Tessa that she told me about. So that feels really lovely.
Yeah, I thought it was really well done.
Yeah, it feels like it
Even the
feels
Chilton's voice, Finn's voice works,
good.
Did you have a part in choosing that?
Yeah, they send voice samples, which is very fun. And people have like wildly different intonations.
So the people who choose terrible narrators had a part in that.
I think a very nice publishing house that took the time to do that. So probably the terrible narrators weren't vetted by the author. Or they liked it.
You only get a little sample,
Yeah.
I will say, and so sometimes it's like they do some of it well, but then there are other voices that you may not be quite as happy with. I'll just put that out there.
I think Tom Hanks did Anne Patchett's book. It's like, well, that works. Like,
Well, and Meryl Streep.
Right, Meryl Streep. Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
You were bathtub with narration.
I think you had a
Do
question.
you have any aspirations to record your own narration?
To record it?
Yes.
No.
Well, sometimes that's what they want.
I think I understand that for memoir
Okay.
writers.
Yeah.
That they would want to do that.
Okay.
It's such a talent to do it well.
Yeah.
It's a really different skill set, I think, in writing. It's like,
And you don't really have a good Irish
I have it's not when I try to do that. I can hear an Irish accent very well when I'm writing, but not when I'm speaking.
and I think in general, like Americans trying to do Irish accents, it's just like, no.
Yeah, Brad Pitt did it.
Yeah.
But Irish men do get really good casting though. It's like Brad Pitt, Cillian Murphy.
Yeah.
They're gonna be fine.
Yeah.
But there would be able to do that.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I know that Flynn is very happy to sign books. And thank you for coming, everybody. And thank you for writing such a wonderful novel.